Hey everyone, this is a refresher for Sheriff of Nottingham. To set up the game, give each player their merchant stand along with their matching merchant bag. Then choose one player to be the banker. The banker then gives each player, including themselves, 50 gold, 120, 5 5s, and 5 1s. Then shuffle all the cards together and deal 6 cards to each player face down. If you're playing a 3-player game, before shuffling the cards, make sure to remove all the cards that have the 4+ icon in the bottom left-hand corner. Cards that have a 4+ icon should only be used if you're playing a game with 4 or more players. Then place the rest of the cards in a face-down draw pile in the middle section of the card holder. Then draw 5 cards from the draw pile and place them face up to form a discard pile. Then draw another 5 cards, placing them face up to form a second discard pile. And remember that all players can look through the cards in both discard piles at any time, but they can't change the order of the cards when looking through each pile. The player who is carrying the highest value of actual cash will be the first sheriff. There are a few different types of cards in the game. Cards with a green border are legal goods. Cards with a red border and red banner are contraband goods. And cards with a red border and gold banner are royal goods. Promo cards have a blue banner at the bottom of the card, and they can be added to the deck without needing to remove any other cards. The top right corner shows the number of points the good will be worth at the end of the game. The bottom right corner shows the good's penalty, which is the amount of gold you have to pay if you are required to pay a penalty during the inspection phase. And the back of the rulebook will show you how many of each good is in the game. The game is played over a series of rounds. During each round, one player will be the sheriff and the other players will be the merchants. Each round is divided into 5 phases: market, load merchant bag, declaration, inspection, and end of round. The sheriff only participates in the last 2 phases, the inspection phase and the end of round phase. At the end of each round, after everyone has drawn back up to 6 cards, the sheriff token will be passed to the player on the left. The game ends when each player has been the sheriff twice, or 3 times if it's a 3-player game. In the market phase, you can choose to discard unwanted cards from your hand, replacing them with new ones. In this game, we'll say that green started as the sheriff. Starting with the player to the sheriff's left and going clockwise, each merchant player takes a turn. On your turn, you can set aside up to 5 cards from your hand face down, then draw back up to 6. You can draw cards from the top of the draw pile or the top of either discard pile. You must always draw the cards you want from the discard piles before drawing from the draw pile. If you take cards from the draw pile, then you can no longer draw from the discard piles. After you have drawn your cards, place the cards you set aside on one of the discard piles, face up in any order you choose. So let's say that the purple player wants to replace these 4 cards. They'd put them face down in front of them. Now they can draw 4 cards from the market. So let's say that they take the chicken from the discard pile, and they also want the cheese, so they grab the cheese, and they take the top card of the draw pile, and now since they started drawing from the draw pile, they have to take the last card from the draw pile as well. And now that they've drawn their cards, they can place the cards that they set aside on any one of the discard piles in any order they choose. So they could choose to place the contraband face up and put it here. Now that purple's done with the market phase, yellow would take their turn, and then blue would take their turn. Once each merchant has completed the market phase, then they move on to the load merchant bag phase. In this phase, merchant players will put the goods cards in their bags that they want to take to the market. All merchant players place goods in their bags at the same time. You can put 1 to 5 goods in your merchant bag. You have to put at least 1 good in your bag, and you can't put more than 5. Once you snap your bag closed, you can't change what's inside. Once everyone has loaded their bags, you move on to the declaration phase. In this phase, you will tell the sheriff what goods you have in your bag. Starting with the player to the sheriff's left and going clockwise, each player looks the sheriff in the eyes and tells them what goods they are bringing into the market. Then they hand their bag over to the sheriff. As a merchant player, you must follow 3 conditions when declaring what goods are in your bag. You can only declare legal goods, you can only declare 1 kind of goods, and you must declare only the exact number of cards in your bag. So, for example, if it were my turn to give my bag to the sheriff, I could tell them that I'm bringing in 4 chickens. I would have to have 4 actual cards in my bag, and I have to say that I'm bringing in one type of legal goods, which are the chickens. I don't actually have to have 4 chickens in my bag. They could be anything. The purple player will say they're bringing in 3 cheese. The yellow player will say they're bringing in 2 bread. And the blue player will also say that they're bringing in 2 bread. Once the sheriff has all of the merchant bags, it's time for the inspection phase, where the sheriff will inspect the bags. The sheriff can inspect the bags in any order. They also decide how many bags to inspect. They can inspect all of them, some of them, or none of them. As the sheriff, you can threaten to open a merchant's bag unless they offer a bribe. Merchants don't have to bribe the sheriff, but if they do decide to offer a bribe, it can include any of the following: gold, legal goods in your merchant stand, contraband in your merchant stand, goods in your bag, whether they are legal or contraband, or promises of future favors. All of the bribes are binding, except for promises of future favors. You cannot offer any of the cards in your hand as part of a bribe. If the sheriff accepts the bribe and the merchant is allowed to pass, they only need to pay the sheriff the goods they promised that actually exist. If the merchant promised goods to the sheriff that are not in their bag, they don't have to pay them. For example, if I'm the merchant, I can say to the sheriff, if you let me pass, I'll give you 2 cheese that are in my bag. If the sheriff accepts my bribe and allows me to pass, but I don't have any cheese in my bag, I don't have to pay the sheriff. Also, as a merchant, you can bribe the sheriff to try to get them to open someone else's bag. So yellow could say, I'll give you 5 coins if you open up purple's bag. After bribes have been offered, if any, the sheriff must decide whether or not to open each bag. If the sheriff accepts a bribe, then they must do whatever they were bribed to do, except for promises of future favors, which are not binding. Once the sheriff has made a choice whether to open a bag or not, it cannot be changed. If the sheriff unsnaps the bag, they have to inspect it. If they hand the bag back without opening it, they can no longer choose to inspect it or accept a bribe. If the sheriff lets you pass, then you must immediately show your cards in your bag to the other players. All legal goods are placed in the matching spaces of your merchant stand face up. These goods can always be inspected by any player at any time. All contraband is kept hidden. You must show the number of contraband cards that you smuggled, but not their type. Place any contraband goods face down at the top of your merchant stand. Bread are placed here, apples are placed here, cheese, chickens, and contraband is placed here. So let's say that the sheriff is going to let purple pass. Purple takes back their bag. They open their bag. They show the players the 3 legal goods, which are 3 bread, and they place them next to their merchant stand. If they had any contraband, it would go face down here. If the sheriff inspects your bag, you were either telling the truth about the goods in your bag or you were lying. If you were telling the truth and your bag has exactly what you said was in it, the sheriff must pay you gold equal to the penalty on every legal good in the bag. You then add the legal goods to your merchant stand. Since yellow was telling the truth and there were 2 bread, which was exactly what they said was in the bag, the sheriff would have to pay yellow 4 gold, 2 gold for each card. So yellow would place the goods in their stand, and the sheriff would pay them 4 gold. If you were lying and your bag does not have exactly what you said was inside, any goods that you did declare truthfully are allowed into the market and you place them face up on your merchant stand. Any goods that you lied about are confiscated. The sheriff takes all the confiscated goods and places them on one of the discard piles, in any order they choose. And lastly, you must pay a fine to the sheriff for all confiscated goods. The fine is equal to the penalty shown at the bottom of each card. So for example, let's say that yellow said they were bringing in 2 bread. The sheriff doesn't believe them, so he opens the bag. And we have 1 bread and 1 contraband. They weren't lying about having this bread, so they take it and place it on their merchant stand. Now they were lying about this card. They brought a silk instead of a bread. So the sheriff will confiscate this good, placing it on one of the discard piles, and then the merchant will have to pay the sheriff the penalty cost, which for this card is 4 gold. And we'll say that the sheriff let blue pass. So blue opens their bag, They hide their contraband, and they show their legal goods and place them on their merchant stand. Once the sheriff is done letting people pass or inspecting bags, then you move on to the end of round phase. If all players have been the sheriff twice or 3 times in a 3-player game, the game ends immediately. Otherwise, starting with the player to the left of the sheriff and going clockwise, each player will draw from the draw pile until they have 6 cards in their hand. Then the player who was the sheriff passes the sheriff marker to the player on their left, and the next round will begin with the market phase. It may be possible for a player to run out of gold during the game. If you cannot pay a penalty you owe, you must give the player legal goods from your merchant stand with a value at least equal to the amount you owe. If you ever have to give more value than you owe, you won't receive change for the excess. If you don't have enough legal goods, you must reveal and hand over contraband to make up the difference. The player who received these goods then adds them to their merchant stand. If you've exhausted all the goods and contraband in your market stand to pay a debt, any leftover debt is considered paid. So let's say that green has no gold, but they owe someone 6 gold. They would have to pay someone 2 bread, because this is worth 3 and this is worth 3. And then that player would add it to their merchant stand. If they owed someone 7 gold, they would have to give all 3 breads. Even though the value is 9, they wouldn't get change for the extra gold that they're paying. Or let's say instead that they had no gold and they also had no legal goods, they would have to pay with their contraband, and this would be worth 6. When the game ends, all players discard any cards that are in their hand. These cards are not worth any points. Then everyone reveals their contraband and they calculate their score. To calculate your score, add up the value of all goods you have in your merchant stand, both legal and contraband, any gold coins that you have, any bonuses you earn from being the king or queen of any type of good, and the player with the most points wins. If 2 players tie for the same amount of points, whoever has the most legal goods wins. If there's still a tie, whoever has the most contraband wins. The player who has the most of a legal good is called the king of that good, and the player who has the second most of a legal good is called the queen of that good. The king and queen of each good receive bonus points. So if this player had more bread than any other player, they would get the king's bonus, which is 15 extra points. If they had the second most bread, they would get the queen's bonus, which would be 10 points. If there's a tie for the king's bonus, add the king and queen bonuses together and divide the total equally between all tied players rounding down. Don't pay out bonuses for second place. If there's a tie for the queen's bonus, divide those points equally between the tied players and round down. At the end of the game, the royal goods cards are added to your other legal goods before you determine who wins the king and queen bonus for each type of good. The green apple's royal good counts as 2 apples at the end of the game, so that can help you win the king or queen bonus for the apples. If the draw pile ever runs out, then you shuffle all but the top 5 cards from each of the 2 discard piles to create a new draw pile. That's Sheriff of Nottingham. Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe for more Cosmic Tavern.